Hello, everybody, and welcome to chapter 5 of John. For me, it is the Monday after our time change, so I am a little bit stumbly and mumbly today and a little bit drowsy as we begin for the today, but will not let that bother me as we press forward reading the gospel. I do thank you for everybody that has been watching and has been giving feedback and asking questions and just kind of interacting. That was the purpose of this. The whole point is to just not only learn the Gospel of John, but to have a conversation around it because it is a great gospel and it's worth talking about. As stated, chapter 5 is the shift into kind of a new time period for Jesus, kind of a section shift. So let's call it section 2 of John. And once again, we begin the chapter with a festival. We're not told which festival, but it is a festival. And so I said in an earlier video that one of the things to pay attention to is to pay attention to what takes place during what festival, what lesson is there around what festival, because the festivals of Judaism are all important in the midst of the gospel. Some of them I don't know too many details about. I would love to sit with a rabbi and talk about what the festival means and what it might mean for Jesus to talk about such a thing on that particular festival. I know little bits here and there, but to learn larger ones would be more enlightening, or should bring the scripture to light even better. But here we are. We are at an unknown festival. We're at Beth Zatha, and my professor helped enlighten part of this scripture, because what I didn't know is one of the thoughts was that at this pool, an angel would touch it every morning, and the first person into the pool would be the one who was healed on that day. And so there's this little idea of almost witchcraft. Well, not quite witchcraft, but mysticism, magicalness about this pool, that the bubbles were that of an angel touching it and changing it. So, for some people it was thought to be of God, but what John is kind of driving at is that this pool is not what Jesus can do, that there's a sort of lucky rabbit's foot around it type thing. And that's what the dialogue is, and that's what the setup between the two activities are, that Jesus offers real healing while this is kind of relying on magic of some kind. And so we have this man who's been lying by the pool for over 3 decades. And we get a sense that he's been here and waiting every day, and people just kind of step over him. And he doesn't quite know what to do because he can't move on his own. And he was hoping somebody would pull him in at this point to get him healed. But alas, his struggle is there. And one of the questions that we were asked as a class was, do we know somebody like this? And that's a tough answer, because throughout my ministry, I have known people like this, people who suffer from chronic pain or things that they're very reliant on other people. I've also met people that will blame a lot of things, even though they can work to change their life, they won't. And so it depended on how you kind of looked at that person there. But that's the idea, is he has been stuck in this situation, relying on somebody's good nature to bring him into the pool, and it hasn't happened yet. He doesn't know who Jesus is. He has no idea. He has not asked for healing from Jesus. And those are all important things. Jesus is offering this freely to this man, that it's not something that he's been asking for by God or Jesus or anything. And immediately, when Jesus says, take up your mat and walk, he can take up his mat and walk. And so we kind of end that scene of this new aspect because we start a new theme that's going to run through the rest of the gospel. So in like the first part, it was Jesus using analogies or using things and people taking it literally when Jesus meant something deeper. Now it's going to be overlooking the major event that happens to look at the minutia that's present there. Because the man, because he's carrying a mat, is technically working on the Sabbath. And so the leaders are really upset at the man that he's working on the Sabbath. Even though he's a man that they know has been lying by the pool for that many decades, they are upset that he is working. Now you may say, hey, that's so, so minor. Why are they looking at that? Well, Sabbath laws were very important. Sabbath laws helped bring normalcy to everything. So I'm not kind of put it down, but the idea is that they're overlooking this giant thing that has happened to focus too much on the law. Now, Sabbath laws still exist. When I was serving in Rochester, there was a Jewish home that I would visit for people who were in rehab. And on the Sabbath, the elevator, for example, would turn into a voice command rather than a button pushing, because button pushing was considered work. The elevator would transform and you would call out what number you're there. So these laws still exist, and that's why I'm not putting them down. The whole point is not to put down the laws, but it's that the leaders are so focused on these laws that they're missing the fact that somebody who couldn't walk for 3 decades is now walking, and they're more concerned about his mat. And so we kind of end that section, except you saw the little bit there. They're now after Jesus. This is where the change has happened. And so now they're going to go after Jesus more intentionally and start to look to seek his death. So this is the transformation of the once kind of, okay, we're going to tolerate him and the things that he's doing, into now we must end him. And it begins with the healing of a man on the Sabbath. Then we come back to Jesus and the man still has no idea who Jesus is, which is kind of fun. And then Jesus mentions something about sin. And I want to take a pause here for a moment, because there is a theology that felt that your paralysis was directly connected to your sinfulness, your kind of what was wrong with you, or your family's, or your family's family, and that spanned generations. Jesus is not concerned there. That is not what the sin that Jesus is talking about. The sin in John is the worldwide, according to one of my textbook writers, O'Day and Hyland, it's the world's collective alienation from God. So this idea of separateness, of staying in the darkness, if we're going to use John's terminology here, but it's not an individual sinfulness. That is not what the gospel writer is concerned about. It is more this concern of staying in the darkness, of not recognizing God for who God is, and that is the kind of bigger sinfulness, a cosmic sinfulness, rather than an individual sinfulness. So when Jesus talks to the man, he says, yeah, make sure you do these things so you don't fall back into that separation from God. That would be the better kind of sentence structure there. But the word sin is the Greek word there, so that's the right translation, but that's the mentality. Don't fall for the magic stuff, like the pool, but recognize who God is and stay in the light, so to speak. And then we get this long speech from Jesus. And this is part of John. Jesus talks a lot in John. He has lots and lots of speeches throughout the entire gospel. And you may, as you were reading it, felt as if it were a trial. And so this kind of picks up everything, that the trial really kind of starts here, and it's going to go to the fake trial that happens at the end of John. But this is how an interaction would have played out. Jesus cannot defend himself, so he's got to call what we might call witnesses or defenders for Jesus's work. How does Jesus do the things that Jesus is doing? And so as his first witness, Jesus calls God, essentially, to the Jewish leaders, saying, God is my defense. I do nothing outside of the work of God. And that's where Jesus is going to continually to draw from. And in fact, all the Gospel of John, Jesus does nothing outside of the will of God. And so if we're talking about, the sinless Jesus, Jesus is directly connected to God. Jesus will say, all right, God and I are one in chapter 10, for example. And at the end of during chapter 17, Jesus is going to say these kinds of words. So the idea is that Jesus's mission is God's mission, and anything that Jesus does is within the boundaries of God's mission. And so Jesus first uses God as his witness, as his defense. And then the second person Jesus mentions is Moses. And I said, look for all the occurrences of Moses throughout the Gospel of John, because Jesus is Moses, and Jesus is the act, and Jesus is the Frida, and Jesus is God, I should say. So that was in a previous video, that the role of Jesus fulfills all three things in the Moses narrative. But Jesus says, Moses is my witness, and all the people would have gone, what? What? What are you talking about? Because Moses taught, i.e. the law, teaches who God is. And if you can't see who God is, how could you essentially interpret the law? So Moses is the one that is condemning you at this point, because you've lost track of what it is. That's really what's at stake here, right? They're calling on him to be a blasphemer because of his work on the Sabbath. And so Jesus is saying the very laws that you're quoting essentially are the ones that are condemning you at this point, because you don't even recognize Moses's testimony about me. And so it feels very much like a trial. And as I said, it's going to kind of feel that way anytime Jesus is in front of others, especially accusers. It's going to feel very much like a trial. But that's what Jesus is saying. You want a defense. My first witness is God. My second witness is Moses. And if you beyond that, I don't know who else you're going to call. But you can't testify on your own behalf. So Jesus can't call up his signs, for example, as a witness to the fact that he is doing what God intends. And that's going to be key. He can't use his own signs as a defense, because what's going to happen is there's this idea that, kind of like the Moses narrative, anybody can do signs, right? The Pharaoh's people did signs as soon as Moses did signs. So Jesus can't use that defense. So he's, throughout the entire gospel, look for these long passages where he's accused, and then he goes off on what seems a wild tangent. But think of it as in terms of somebody defending themselves in the face of an accusation. And here is my defense, right? God, I do nothing outside of God. And Moses is the one that really testifies to me, is the first kind of defense of Jesus. And yet, they cannot see the connections. The accusers in this point, the Judean leaders, still can't see. They choose to remain in the darkness at this time. And so we have this man who has been healed, who tells the leaders who healed him, which is going to lead ultimately to Jesus' death. So, did Jesus know what he was doing? Was this part of the laid out plan? And I ask that because we're going to get into sections where Jesus talks about placing himself into danger, where Jesus talks about laying down his own life, where he talks about all of these things, and this is what the disciples are to do. Are they willing to throw themselves to the wolves uh, on behalf of God? And Jesus is willing to do that. So Jesus heals a man who did not know him, which is ultimately going to lead towards his false trial by these same leaders that are looking to kill him right now. And so Jesus has taken a risk and now placed his own life in front of this, all due to this man's testimony of who healed them on the Sabbath. So sometimes I ask my congregation, why did Jesus die? Or what was the accusation against him? If you had said blasphemy, I would have accepted that, but it was healing on the Sabbath, according to the Gospel of John, is the reason why the Jewish leaders now are after Jesus. So we'll end there and we'll pick it up next week. So see you next week. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Take care, everybody.